I'd like to see it like transition to a Bitcoin standard more smoothly, and having a Bitcoin stockpile will definitely help with that. If it doesn't have it, then I think you get horrible repression and all kinds of drastic, weird things going on, including hyperinflation and so on. I don't know how optimistic I would be about the world if it weren't for Bitcoin. That act of holding is the monetization of better money, and this is a much better savings vehicle. And then all of the other stuff like stocks or real estate or whatever. Why does Bernie Sanders need 3 houses, right? Like, he's one person. He keeps them because he's part of the rich people. He's not really a socialist. Part of why Ethereum's gone down so much is because, so for me, the big enemy is fiat money. It must be destroyed because it is such a pernicious thing that causes all sorts of wrong incentives, all sorts of moral hazards, all sorts of evil all over the world.
What is real? How do you define real?
You can't jump into cash. Cash is trash. What do? You get out.
Jimmy Song is a Bitcoin developer, educator, and entrepreneur. He is a programmer with over 20 years experience and open source contributor to many different Bitcoin projects, and the author of Programming Bitcoin, The Little Bitcoin Book, Thank God for Bitcoin, Bitcoin and the American Dream, and most recently, Fiat Ruins Everything, How Our Financial System is Rigged and How Bitcoin Fixes It. Jimmy has been a lecturer at the University of Texas, an expert witness and legal cases involving Bitcoin, and an advisor to multiple companies. Jimmy writes a weekly newsletter. He has a Bitcoin podcast called Bitcoin Fixes This. Jimmy Song, welcome back to the Bitcoin Matrix podcast. How are you?
I am great. Thank you so much for having me back. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, I'm super excited to get into it. The book is phenomenal. It's profound. You know, I think it's your best piece yet. Found it very insightful. I also found it cutting and kind of witty. Kind of a lot of clever sort of humor in there, I thought, or kind of like very sarcastic and kind of getting at the point. But what inspired you to write this book?
Yeah, what inspired me was doing my podcast, Bitcoin Fixes This, and just diving deep into all kinds of different industries and stuff. And I started to realize after doing the podcast for a while that it's not really Bitcoin that fixes everything. It's just that fiat ruins everything first. And it's not that Bitcoin is this amazing holy water that you can just sprinkle over everything and now everything's amazing. It's that fiat is this like corrupting influence over all kinds of things. And the more I dug in, the more I realized, like, man, this entire world is infected with fiat money. And that's where that started. And, I started writing some articles for Bitcoin Magazine. Eventually, I ended up compiling a lot of those into the book, along with some other essays that I had written that I hadn't published anywhere, and new essays. And that ended up being the book. It was a lot of fun. I wrote it mostly during my year traveling abroad with my family, and you can see that all in the acknowledgments, all the different people that I got to meet in Bitcoin communities all over the world. And it was a fun book to write, and it was it turns out that like the one regret I have, especially after watching a lot of what Elon Musk has been doing recently, is that it turns out that I wasn't cynical enough. I thought the book was pretty cynical, and I was like, okay, yeah, the fiat ruins a lot of stuff. It's all corrupt and rotten. I had no idea how corrupt and rotten the whole thing was. And I mean, we're just scratching the surface, right? Like $40 billion on USAID, but get into Social Security. I'm sure we'll find a bunch of things. Get into housing and urban development, HHS, energy, and then you get into stuff like defense. And eventually, I'm hoping we get into like the Federal Reserve. I mean, the rot is just so deep, and in a weird way, I'm more optimistic because of that, because that means there's a lot of stuff that can be fixed rather than it's all just sort of like systemic and like you can't do anything about it. I feel like we're empowered now that we see just how deep the rot goes.
Yeah, and the rot does go deep. And I thought you really were very insightful in not looking at this, though, from the top down, but from the bottom up, like how it kind of impacts the individual, the family, relationships, companies even, and how things kind of got where they are. Who is this book dedicated to and why?
It's dedicated to my wife, Julie, and it's because she's been an amazing mother, and I could not be where I am without her. So, and I've dedicated the other books to various people and so on. But I don't know if I publish more books, I'll specifically mention my children maybe or something like that. But I wanted it to be like. Yeah, I wanted it to be hers. So, yeah, that's why.
Well, that's great. And the book is so much about, not just individuals, but family and how important that is. I want to start, though, with rent seeking. Why is it, so many practical-minded people, more or less, in a fiat economy, seek out a rent-seeking job?
Yeah, there are multiple answers to that, but I suspect a lot of it has to do with status. So right now, you can make $150K a year being a UPS driver, right? Like that, and that's great work. You're providing value, but it's not very high status because you're delivering packages. Whereas if you're a DEI officer at some Silicon Valley company, that's considered significantly more prestigious because you're at a Silicon Valley company, you're VC backed and something like that. Or even if you're like working for the Social Security Administration or something and, like not really doing anything productive and rent seeking, it still feels like a higher status job because it's office work. You're not actually having to, move garbage cans or drive trucks or something like that. So there's a status component, which I think, unfortunately has seeped in as a result of fiat money, right? Like doing office work is considered better, and almost all rent-seeking jobs are office work. Not all of them are, to be fair, but a significant number of them are. And there's that part. But the other part is that you just don't have to deal with as much competition. If you are rent-seeking, your job is pretty stable, right? Like you're not going to get cut unless you happen to have been a part of USAID or one of these government organizations that's getting cut, or even like DEI officers like some of these companies or whatever. But generally, they've been pretty good gigs that don't require that much work. You can be kind of lazy. And you can sort of hold on to your position because you already had it. So it has this security component. It has this status component. Suspect those are the main reasons why so many people go into them. And obviously the effort or the lack thereof that's required. So, all those things combine to make it very attractive, right? There's not... It used to be that if you had idle hands or something like that, the idle hands are a devil's playground and stuff like that. In previous generations, you were looked upon as sort of like this leech of society, right? Like, somebody that's up to no good or whatever. And you'd be shunned to some degree socially. But if you're a rent seeker now, you work at an HR department in some company, yeah, nobody bats an eye, right? You're an investment banker or something. You're actually looked up to, instead of somebody that's sort of treated with scorn like they were in other generations. So, I would say that everything is sort of like aligned under a fiat standard towards the rent seekers having more power and status than under a sound money standard, and that's basically, the corrupt incentives that have led to where we are.
Yeah. I used to work at one of the, Fortune 50 companies, and the amount of rent seeking you would see just in swaths from, that's going to take you 6 weeks for our team to deliver that, to, billing 50 hours a week just because that's what we agreed we'd build to. That's how much we worked. I mean, that's how much it took us to get there. To HR departments kind of walking around with a lot of power and authority to enforce things that are not anywhere near the profit of the business. And even just people in departments like finance and accounting who have you run certain, just go do all this spreadsheet mechanics for the sake of looking at something that we're not going to actually utilize in the business. It's amazing. How does fiat steal dreams and replace meaning?
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of people do go towards stuff like rent seeking. And the thing about rent seeking is that it has all of the external trappings of status and things like that. You usually make a pretty good salary, or at the very least, you have access to debt so you can fake it. But for the most part, they're not very fulfilling jobs, right? Like if you're some accountant that's, like not really doing anything or making projections on a project that's not going to happen, but needs to be there for political reasons or something like that, which happens all the time all over the place. I mean, you inside, that what you're doing doesn't really matter. And unfortunately, people go into those positions because there's like the other things that you could be doing that would add value and so on. They're much harder, right? Like try to start a business. It's very difficult in a lot of places, even in the United States. Like the barriers to starting a business are significant, right? Like getting the right licenses and permits and, setting up a HR if you're hiring anybody. Even like the tax part of it is very difficult. And, there's a lot of things that most people just don't want to deal with. So it's like, all right, I'll just go work for somebody instead of pursuing this thing that would be a lot more fulfilling and useful and add value. Because I think in the end, what people know deep inside is how much value that they're actually adding. I mean, they may say to other people, hey, yeah, I provide value by doing this, this, and this. But in reality, they know, okay, yeah, it's all bullshit. Like I'm not really actually doing all that much. And, I'm using my political power that I have to, essentially extract a salary from somebody somewhere. And it's that's honestly a significant amount of corporate America. It's probably like 95% of government. There's just so much of that sort of thing going on. And the thing that gets lost, the trade-off that you have are your dreams, are the goals that you might have, are the things that you might be contributing to humanity. And you just sort of justify doing all of that as a way to survive or something, or to make it. But yeah, it's unfortunate.
Yeah, and one of the hardest parts for me after a while, and part of the rent seeking almost became like, can I find a job where I don't have to answer to people, to the BS? And what really was painful was not so much like, yeah, we got to do what we have to do because so-and-so asked for it, but like, can you not like pretend this really matters? Like, can we just not have the LARPing? How does fiat education take over for family legacy? This was something I thought was really interesting, the way you looked at legacy.
Yeah, so the family legacy used to be like you have like a name, right? Like your last name comes from your father and your father's father and so on. And one of the things that we used to always say is, hey, to your children would be, hey, I've given you a good name, right? Like don't waste it. And your name had a reputation. Your name was something that meant something. In the United States, that's not really the case anymore, unless you happen to be like a Bush or Clinton or Kennedy or something like that, like, name brand last names that people might recognize. Otherwise, you pretty much have to be a self-made man. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but in a sense, the thing that the main thing that we used to pass down to our children is no longer the last name. It's whatever you're providing for them, and education ends up being a significant part of it. And of course, that's pretty much monopolized, at least in the public sphere, by the government, and even in the private sphere to a large degree with four-year colleges and so on, and the chokehold that they have over that ends up being sort of like the credentialism or reputation that you're forced to go get if you want a certain thing. Although that seems to be changing, at least with the more recent stuff that's gone on in a lot of colleges. But that for a very long time, that was how you made it, was by getting a name brand college right under with your name rather than your last name. It was what college did you go to? What would be the much more important thing that people would be looking at? And I get it. It at scale, these things happen, right? If you have Dunbar's number of people, last names might actually mean something. If you're like part of a church or something that's not too big, and you hear a last name and say, "Oh yeah, I know what that family's about and how they raise their kids or whatever." But when you have much more than that, right? Millions of people, typically you get thousands of resumes for an open position and stuff. Like, how are you supposed to figure out who you're going to go get, right? Like who you're going to accept? And education or the college that you came out of has become sort of like the shortcut for a lot of that. And I mean, I don't blame them. Like these are the incentives are what they are, and giant companies are, I explain in the book how they came about, but that's what most of them are. Instead of small local businesses that pull from the community, it's just these huge corporations where they have to commoditize you, right? Like, or figure out who you are just based on a few scant pieces of data. They don't know your parents or what your last name means, so they use this other shortcut, and that's unfortunately become the major way in which you kind of get invited to be an elite or a rent seeker, as it were.
Yeah, it's amazing how many people wear their college name with so much pride. On jackets and sweatshirts and hats, and it's like family to them. It's like they don't argue at the game, but they argue at family dinners. How are fiat companies replacing community?
Yeah, so unfortunately, that's become sort of like the default way by which we identify ourselves, right? Like, it used to be that when you met someone, you would be like, okay, yeah, where are you from? Or, who are your parents? Or, what clan are you from? Stuff like that. And that's actually what our last names used to be, right? Like what clan or what job you had or what service you provided to the community. Now it's, what do you do, right? Like that's almost always like the small talk first question that you ask somebody. What do you do? And our jobs are who we work for ends up being the main identifier of who we are. And, as I argue in the book, it's oftentimes like what determines what you believe, right? Because whatever your company is doing, you're not going to be like, oh, it's complete rent-seeking hogwash. It's, you have to at least rationalize that you're doing something good. Even the worst kind of people always rationalize what they're doing as something good, that as some form of justice or something. And that's what we do with companies, even though most companies, if you analyze them, are like, frankly, sociopathic. If they were a person and, given all the stuff that they do and how they behave, they tend to be very sociopathic. But that's, that ends up being like our sustenance, right? Like that's where we get, it's the one customer that we have of our wares, which is our labor, basically. And we're completely dependent on the company. So in sort of like a weird Stockholm syndrome scenario, you end up defending who has captured you. And that's unfortunately been the case for most people that work for large companies. It's like, yeah, that's my former company, and that's why they're okay or whatever. And that it's replaced identity in so many ways, because we don't, fiat money basically makes these giant companies grow larger and larger and get bailed out and give lots of rent-seeking positions and things like that. So a lot of people feel a lot more loyalty towards the company that's paying them rather than the family that they're a part of.
Yeah. And even people will look at someone and say, oh, they work for so-and-so. They must agree with everything that their company does. You know, and I must not like that person, or I must like this person. They are a teacher. They must be really nice. And not that teachers aren't nice. I don't, but I don't want to make any enemies here. But like, it's interesting. Something you pointed out in the book, though, that was astonishing, is that like what most people in America have like a 6th grade education level now.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's because they've the fiat education system has continually debased over time, right? It used to be that you look at an 8th grade test from like 1890 or something like that, and you have like really hard questions that most adults would not even have a clue as to how to answer. But as you bring more and more people into education and make it compulsory, well, the standards keep dropping because the schools get paid on how many people graduate and how many people attend, and the kids aren't necessarily incentivized to work very hard, so they end up passing people that can't read and stuff. So a 6th grade average education level for the United States sounds about right. Like in the past, it used to be that they would drop out at 6th grade, right? A significant number of them, because they couldn't they couldn't handle it. But now it's just you just raise high school graduation to 6th grade or something like that, and you get all the great statistics that politicians can brag about, which are completely meaningless, really.
Yeah, and I think what was so interesting about that is, the questions you noted there were like very strong questions, and you could tell now that most education is much softer. And even I think the smartest people in the system are just not getting as much done as they could because the system's dragging everyone down so much. And it was really fascinating to kind of see that. And then you start thinking about the conversations you were having with everybody and their ability to decipher facts with a 6th grade education level. But it's not their fault. Everyone's probably a lot smarter than the education system. It's dumbing people down on purpose, I think, at least.
Well, you have the lowest common denominator, basically, and that's fairly low in any public school. And you don't, unless you go to a pretty rigorous college or something like that, even there, there's grade inflation and things like that. So you don't actually learn. There are no real weed out classes anymore. So yeah, that learning's kind of been sacrificed at the behest of inclusion and fiat monetary like achievements, right? Like just sort of fake achievements, and that's what you get. You get lower standards.
Yeah, for sure. How has fiat politics taken over for religion?
Well, politics, unfortunately, has seeped into absolutely everything, right? Like, and everything from bathrooms to what you call people, the pronouns, and like just it's penetrated everything. And part of that is because fiat money gives people or gives politicians sort of this moral mandate. Because when you have fiat money, you can basically do whatever you want, right? Because you have this infinite spigot of money, and what people start voting for, instead of, what are you going to do with the limited amount of money that you have to pick and choose. Let's pick the wise leaders. It's instead now, let's just pick the people that will give me what I want, right? Like, and you have to solve all problems for me. There used to be a public sphere and a private sphere, and the public sphere would be, roads and judges and things like that, and it was fairly limited. Now it's completely penetrated into the private sphere, where you get stuff like, I'm sick, so now it's the government's responsibility to heal me because I'm sick. And it's like, well, why is that their problem? And that never would have been something that people asked about, like, say, 150 years ago, because they clearly understood that there was a boundary between what was private and what was public. Your own health is your own thing, and not not the responsibility of government. But as a result of fiat money, politics now encompasses everything. You have to fix everything for everyone. And that's the sort of moral mandate that every politician sort of subscribes to. So as a result, because the government or politics is sort of the way you get stuff, it's become, in many ways, people's religion, because this is the thing that's going to help them out of whatever, right? Like, and what you believe determines, or how you vote determines how the money will be spent, or how the money will be stolen and spent, really. But that ends up being the thing that you put your trust in, because people have much less agency or feel less powerful, because in a sense the government has taken that slack, right, of whatever problems you have, they're going to fix. And that just necessarily means you're not as much in control. You're giving it up almost willingly. And that's where you get sort of like the all-powerful daddy government that's going to fix all your problems, and soon it becomes the thing that drives your life, and instead of religion or really core beliefs about the nature of the world and things like that. Those become all subservient to your needs, instead of the other way around, where your needs are sacrificed, or where you're submitting them to some higher calling. Instead, it's your needs that become primary, and politics is the means by which you go and get them.
Right, I can see that. Well, then how does fiat debase morality?
Yeah, it's a good one. So the morals are, in a classical sense, they emerge from natural law, right? This is sort of like the common sense, or common morality. English common law is like like what's fair, right? And there's sort of like a common sense of that, and that this, for a long time, this is how English judges would figure out whether or not something is fair or not. Is they would use natural law, and they would determine, okay, A deserves to win this case because, according to natural law principles, this is how I would analyze it. And it's in many ways like discovered, because you get new things, right? You get a cell phone. Okay, what's fair, right? Like, how much privacy can you expect on a phone, and is it fair for somebody else to go and just be snooping on that, and, like, let's say the government or something like that. So that's where morality was, and I think that's a very robust morality. It's robust in the sense that it lasts for a long time, and if you study English common law, it really doesn't change very much, right? It's slowly discovered, and you don't suddenly say, well, what you doing this is now bad, or unless you have lots and lots of precedent for it, and there's a good justification. It takes a long time to change morality in that way. But with centralized law, with fiat money, right? Like, essentially, you can dictate certain things as moral or immoral. Now, some of those might be aligned with natural law. If a government passes a law saying, like, rape is illegal, well, that's in line with natural law. Raping someone is illegal. It is bad in a moral sense. But at a certain point, they overstep their bounds. And part of it is because of this this religious sort of almost power that politics has. And they'll start saying stuff like,
Hey, Bitcoiners, get your sats off your exchange now. This is not a drill. Thea is the world's simplest Bitcoin self-custody solution. With their module multi-sig vault, you decide how to hold your keys. Thea is working day in and day out to bring you the most intuitive Bitcoin self-custody solution, regardless of how much you own or what your storage goals are. And they support your favorite hardware. Download Thea now for hassle-free Bitcoin self-custody at thea.us/Cedric. That's THEYA.US/CEDRIC.
Like, okay, if you don't use the person's preferred pronouns, you are committing violence. That's not something that anyone 100 years ago or even 50 years ago would have said is like part of natural law. But it's something that has been legislated into existence. So you get enough of those kinds of laws that enter into sort of like the general morality. It debases morality itself, right? It's you no longer can trust almost your instinct because you've been told you're racist too many times. So okay, now it's I'm not sure what the right thing is, or there's no easy way to make a decision. It used to be that people would look at natural law and figure out, okay, yeah, that's the right thing to do. Now it's I have to go and read all the laws and figure out like what's legal and illegal before figuring it out. So it muddies this water of moral clarity, right? There's no clarity anymore. It's what was moral 2 years ago is no longer moral because of this law or because of sort of like the propagandistic sort of thing that emerges from fiat money, and that's become the case for a lot of different things, and unfortunately, it captures a lot of people, and they think they have the moral high ground when they really don't. I think there's a C.S. Lewis quote like of the worst tyranny is one where the tyrant thinks that they're doing the right thing, right? And that's I would much rather have like robber barons, I think is the quote or something like that. The idea being that it's better they'll do it with a clean conscience, right? They will oppress you and take away your rights and everything else. I mean, the whole Karen phenomenon was all about that. They really thought that they were doing the right thing, despite lockdowns and masks and all that stuff being horribly against natural law, against even like the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. They felt that they were in the right, despite completely not being so.
Yeah, what feels good is right, and then the power that comes with that. How about the phenomena of virtue signaling? What do you make of that?
Yeah, that's essentially a way to show that you're in the in group, because in a fiat monetary system, the way you get money handed towards you is to claim victimhood. So if I have a problem and the government's not fixing it, you sort of have a claim against the government, and there's sort of like a moral weight to that. It's okay, I'm sick and you're not healing me. The system doesn't work for me, so you have to fix it so that I get free healthcare whenever I need it. And that obviously happens with all kinds of stuff. But at a certain point, it's if you want the benefits that the government is giving to certain groups, then you have to identify as part of that group. And so, virtue signaling is identifying yourself as part of the people that are on the right side, the people that are that want to climb the status ladder or want to identify as a victim and so on, or identify their support for the victims and so on, so that they can get more power. The entire idea is virtue signaling is a political phenomenon. It is something that you are doing for the sake of not for the sake of showing your own virtue. It is for the sake of being identified in the right group. Climbing maybe the status ladder of politics and getting into positions of more power and so on. Because there's obviously a lot there that you can do once you are in power. You only need to look at like Nancy Pelosi and how many millions of dollars that she's gotten, despite having been a career politician all her life. She's somehow worth like $200 million. Like there are benefits to these things that all of these virtue signalers are ultimately after, and yeah, that's the way you play the game essentially at this point to climb up.
Yeah, it was also interesting in the book how you note that corporate employees, W-2 employees, have such better access to debt, which helps really bring conspicuous consumption forward. But it also presents, like entrepreneurs, they have to maybe borrow debt from family, or raise money from family, and go into debt to do these kinds of things, and it's harder. And then you go on to note how many people try to emulate startups by fueling their growth through debt, such as through education funded by student loans. So it's like they're almost mimicking the startup trail, right? But they're investing in their education to earn more money later. Unfortunately, a large percent of people fail in this investment, and many people end up using college as a 4 to 6 year vacation. And I definitely saw that through I got what I think is a good degree, but I got some good grades, but there was a lot of time to have a nice time during a 15-hour work week of schedule. And if you're not working your way through it, then you don't even have a 40-hour job on top of that. And how many people are really putting in 3 hours of study per credit? You also debt makes discipline increasingly difficult. The instant gratification mentality is easily fueled by the availability of credit cards, mortgages, student loans, car loans, and even personal loans. All this, this system attempts this various forms of consumption while taxing, the disciplined behavior of savings through inflation. So savings is brutally taxed, and all sorts of debt is, kind of brought forward and made easy, and mostly through corporate, love and care, as you were saying, or sort of that platform.
Well, yeah. So if you have a corporate job, it's way easier to get a mortgage, right? Try checking off self-employed for any mortgage, and they'll be like, no, like unless you can prove you have many hundreds of thousands in revenue and profit over the last 3 years or something like that. W-2 job, they just need 2 paycheck receipts or something like that. Even if you've been at the
you could
job
be cash
for
flow
only
negative.
Yeah, but it doesn't. But they'll give it to you, and that's really how we measure. We can measure wealth in our society is how much debt do you have access to. So even the poorest people in the United States actually have access to a reasonable amount of debt, right? Whether it's credit cards or payday loans or something like that. They actually have debt facilities, unsecured debt facilities that are like that you can go get in student loans, lots of stuff. You go to somewhere like El Salvador and you find people that have access to no debt at all, right? So on the other end of the scale, you have people like Mark Zuckerberg, and I read about this many years ago. He got like a 1.7% mortgage. It's like no one gets a 1.7% mortgage. And it wasn't for cheap property. He was buying like all the houses around his house so he can do something with it. And it was like 1.7%. Why? Well, because he's Mark Zuckerberg, right? Like he can do that because he doesn't want to sell his Facebook stock. So he's just going to hold on to it and borrow against it and get 1.7% instead of, I think at the time it was like 3.5% for the normal person. So that level of debt, like that access to debt is what determines how rich you are, because like you said, keeping savings is stupid, right? Especially in the dollar. Even like keeping it in stocks or land is a lot of work, and that requires maintenance and taxes of some kind, and rebalancing and doing a lot of different things. You can pay a professional to do it or pay an entire family office. But that whole idea of saving is like as wealth, which is the traditional way towards wealth, has been completely made defunct by fiat money, because all of this money is available for newly printed for new printing. Like this is how money comes into the economy through loans. So whatever collateral you might have, and it might even be unsecured, like as it is with like credit card debt and and student loans to some degree. You can just kind of get it. And this is how money enters the economy, and banks are incentivized to loan it out because, of course, they're making interest off of you. So loan as much as you can because there's no opportunity cost of money. This is the sort of like stupidity behind it, is that the bank gets to pick and choose who gets the money, and inevitably it's the already rich people, so they get richer, and the poor people and like the people that are at the bottom, they get worse rates or no rates at all because they can't find loans anywhere.
Right. Well, how is profiting from speculative asset bubbles like a taxi cab medallion or Rothkos or baseball cards a form of rent seeking?
Yeah, it's a form of rent seeking because it's really capturing the value of expansionary monetary policy, right? And that's been the case in every central bank. I mean, we had a brief period where it slowed down just a little bit, but generally, money is always expanding, and that money needs somewhere to go. So if you're holding a scarce asset, what tends to happen in a central bank-backed fiat monetary system is that those are the places where it gets parked, where you have something scarce that other people want. So New York taxi cab medallion or a Rothko painting are good examples of such things that are kind of scarce, and therefore, and other people want it. So those things go up in value. Land is another one, right? Real estate. I think it was Mark Twain that said you should go get land because they're not making any more of it, right? It has sort of like a natural scarcity to it. So scarce assets capture a lot of the value of monetary expansion. And that's, in a sense, a form of rent seeking. Because obviously you didn't provide any value. You're just sort of a Cantillon winner. You're capturing the value of that, and that's a lot of rich people keep getting richer because they have all of their assets in these scarce commodities or scarce items, and they whenever the money expands, they grow richer, but the poor schlub that doesn't have anything scarce, that's just trying to buy eggs or something, they get poorer and poorer to the point where, they can't afford a house. All the houses are taken up by the people that are rich. Why does Bernie Sanders need 3 houses, right? Like, he's one person, but because it's an investment and he has a lot of money, he owns 3 properties, and those other 2 properties could, if he were a good socialist, he'd be like, okay, well, my other 2 houses, I'll go give them to other people that need them or something like that. But instead, it's just he keeps them because he's part of the rich person people. He's not really a socialist. And that's how the whole game is played. Basically, it's you hold on to the assets that are scarce and borrow to buy them if necessary, because you'll get richer that way.
Right. And this tends to, as you noted, breed deep societal resentment towards wealthy individuals, because it's just sort of, people think their wealth is often attributed to probably luck rather than providing value.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, think about somebody like Mark Cuban, right? Like, what's his claim to fame? He sold broadcast.com to Yahoo for I forget. It was many billions of dollars. And that's how he became a billionaire. Very soon after, Yahoo stopped the service. Right? He got really, really lucky on the timing of that. And as a result, he was able to buy the Dallas Mavericks and and get on TV and do all this other stuff. His other companies that he's created, they haven't provided that much value, if at all. So, is it any wonder that people think of him as sort of maybe a slightly smarter lottery winner or something like that? Because in a sense that he just happened to time things correctly. He didn't actually provide that much value. And there's a lot of stories like that, especially in the investment banking world, where you do like 100x FX trade that happens to hit. and you're kind of made for life because you've made commission on that or something, and now you made $20 million. Okay, right? You totally deserve that. No. But should it go the other way? Well, your firm takes the hit and you get zero, but and the firm eventually gets bailed out by the Fed or the government in some way, shape, or form, and that's happened a lot. And like we don't know about the Fed bailing out these places, but we suspect that that's the case, which is why we want to audit the Fed. But this is the sort of thing that happens a lot in a fiat economy, is that you get people like Nancy Pelosi that get to $200 million without having been a career politician. I think there's a whole bunch of lifetime politicians that are somehow worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and there's something deeply suspicious about that. And that's not even luck. That's just straight up corruption. And there's, a lot of people. The whole thing with Hunter Biden being like, on the board of Burisma, a Ukrainian energy company. Like, what the hell? Like, of course, there's going to be resentment towards people like that. I don't. And part of I think like Donald Trump's popularity is that. He didn't do any of that, right? Like he actually developed property. Like he's a real estate developer, right? And he actually creates big buildings and stuff. And that's how he became rich, was by actually doing. I don't think people resent that nearly as much as Nancy Pelosi or Mitch McConnell or Hunter Biden. It's the corrupt way of earning money, like, just seems very wrong. And fiat money, like, just adds so many such positions, and we're finding out just how many there are with Doge and so on. And I really hope a lot of these like Cantillon billionaires, right? Like I'm sure there's a bunch of them, like go to prison, right? Or at the very least get the money back. But I hope they go to prison. And I think there's a large part of the American public that hope for the same thing. It's you're like doing things in a completely gross way. Like you need to go to prison.
It's going to be interesting to see what happens. I don't know if anyone's going to prison. We'll see. How does fiat debase marriage?
Yeah, so that was an interesting chapter to write, right? Because I start with this whole like rant on love and stuff like that. But what I did know was that the first no fault divorce law was in 1969, signed by the governor of California at the time, Ronald Reagan, and that is just it. Like if you look at sort of divorce rates, like it starts exploding in 1971. A large part of that is that we went into a welfare state. We already had like the Great Society programs that were sort of providing for the poor and for the old and things like that. All of this sort of like dependence on others, on the government rather than people in your life, naturally debases the relationships that you have. And if you're depending on the government for your sustenance, then you're not going to care if you divorce, or it's not going to be as big of a price to pay. It used to be that once you divorced, especially if you were the woman, well, like what are you going to do? How are you going to live? And there was like a mutual dependence that marriage represented. But with no fault divorce, essentially, you didn't just like the intent was to make divorces a lot less painful, but what you actually did was debase the entire marriage, what I would call a covenant, but the marriage contract, by just saying, there are no rules within marriage. That you're not promising anything, you're not promising to be faithful or whatever. Because previous to no fault divorce, you have to have a cause, right? Like, oh, he cheated on me, that's why I want a divorce, or he's being abusive, or she's doing this or whatever. That was why the no fault divorce was created. But once you have no fault divorce, that means that the marriage doesn't mean anything, right? Like, at least in the state size. Now, I personally think that marriage shouldn't be with the state at all. The original reason for marriage licensing laws were because of polygamy and interracial marriage. And, however you feel about either of those, like, the government stepping in just did not make things any better, right? Like, what it ended up doing was just regulating it more, to the point where you have laws like no fault divorce, where it's sort of debased everywhere. I believe New York was like the last one to enable no fault divorce, but basically it's the law of the land now. Every state has no fault divorce, which means that every marriage, at least legally speaking, has no real promises behind it. It's going to be split 50-50 no matter what. And we don't care who started it. It's just going to be whatever. So unsurprisingly, that's led to a lot more divorces. And interestingly enough, it did not decrease the mental trauma of divorce, which was the intent of no fault divorce. So it used to be, okay, the trauma is in having to lie and say that your husband was cheating on you when he wasn't, just so you could get the divorce, or something like that. Now the no fault divorce should reduce the lying, but actually it's increased it significantly. If you've ever been in a courtroom with a couple getting divorced, and I've unfortunately had to be in one as an expert witness, man, the stuff that they say to each other is just absolutely cruel, and it's all in the public record and so on. It is just deeply traumatic, and it hasn't gotten better at all as a result of no fault divorce. So no fault divorce came about as a result of a lot of the sort of like government intervention, especially like the Great Society programs, essentially the growth of the welfare state, and that in turn debased marriage. So that's kind of where we are at. I suspect that we're heading even further down that road. You're going to have like polygamy or polyamory in some way be more acceptable in places. And at that point, what does marriage even mean? Like, can you and your brother get married? Like, what does that mean? Like, if it's all about like rights or whatever, which a lot of homosexual couples were talking about, then well, why can't your brother get it or whatever? It's basically lost meaning. It used to be a word that meant something very specific, but because of the legal stuff around it, it's become this very messy, undefined, debased thing, and it's been as debased as love.
Well, that was my next question. I mean, what happened to the L word?
Yeah, it used to be. It's a Christian concept, right? Charity. This idea of desiring to do for others something good so that they benefit. But then it became like this expression of feeling, like I love ice cream, or I love you too, or I love that show or this book or whatever. And the two kind of got conflated to the point where when you love somebody, it's just you enjoy them or something, right? It's not about the actual virtue of doing something for their benefit, right? So that they can grow in some way or be helped or fulfill their needs in some way. And that tracks with sort of what fiat has become. It used to be that work was about providing value to other people, but fiat money has made it so that rent seeking is completely viable. And that's not about providing value at all. It's about sort of like getting into sort of like a political position or something like that. And in many ways, love has gone the same way. It's about what you're. It's no longer about the stuff that you're doing for the other person's sake. It's become very selfish. It's what can you do for me, and how can I be fulfilled in this? Rather, it becomes all about yourself. It's become very narcissistic in many ways, which if you're not dealing with reality very much, tends to be the case. And fiat lets you suspend reality, so people just become much more narcissistic.
Right. Yeah. Just so much more focus on personal happiness within the marriage.
Yeah.
What happens, or what used to happen to a lazy, unproductive leech in an extended family back in the day?
They used to get disowned, and that used to be a big deal, right? If you got disowned by a family, you no longer have any inheritance. You're sort of denied as part of the family, and you would sometimes even be denied the same last name to some degree, right? It's that person was disowned years ago, right? They're not really part of that family anymore. There were consequences to behaving very badly to charity, to love, to if you're abusing sort of the gift of other people.
Hey Bitcoiners, I'm heading to Bitcoin 2025 in Las Vegas from May 27th to May 29th, and you need to be there. This isn't just another conference, it's the ultimate Bitcoin party. Grab your ticket now using promo code MATRIX or at the link in the description. See you in Vegas, freaks. Let's make this one legendary.
You would have a bad reputation, and that would come back to you, and you would either have kind of a very miserable life. But with fiat, what you get is, instead of the community sort of providing for you, right? If you're, it used to be that you have cancer, okay, people bring you meals and people help you and maybe contribute to help you get the right medicine or whatever. Now it's this government entity is going to take care of it, and you can be a complete ingrate and it's fine. There's a lot of that sort of narcissism, right? It's you can be completely self-focused because there's no real demand from the government other than you check a few boxes or whatever, because this is sort of an entitlement and not something that you're given as a gift. And those are very different things, and how people respond to them tend to be very different. And this is where I think there's a part of the book where I talked about social justice and how a lot of people equate the two, that doing something for somebody, right, an act of charity, is the same as voting for a policy that helps that person. And those are not equivalent at all, because first of all, if you did something for somebody else, there's a good chance of gratitude, right? Thank you for giving me this because I really needed it or whatever. If a government program is doing it, that person's thinking, well, it's my right. This is what I deserve, and this is if you don't get and they're just going to demand more and so on. So the posture of the person receiving is very different, and the way they receive it is very different. So, and that's a critical part of being human, right? It's that relationship, that relational sort of dynamic of giving and charity and all that. It's supposed to change not just the giver's heart, but the recipient's heart, and none of the sort of external trappings that fiat fakes it with kind of work that way. Where I don't remember any welfare queens on the dole thing saying, "Oh, thank you, government." I'm so happy that they did it for me. Or it's instead I need more, right? It's a very sort of narcissistic and exploitive relationship, or dysfunctional, I guess is the better word, relationship, rather than one that's actually bound in love or community or something like that.
Right. Yeah, it's a shame to see charity be debased like that. Why don't you think we value as a society the growth of the human population?
Yeah, so I've thought about this a lot, and I'm going to have a slightly different answer than the one in the book. So what fiat money does is it essentially saves the incumbents from everything. So you get sort of like no progress, right? Because the incumbents get to write the rules, so they stay in their position. I point out in the book, for example, that a lot of politicians are significantly older than like a generation ago. Just because you have that position, you're not going to let it go. It's too profitable, right? And wealth accumulates to the old people. So Dianne Feinstein died maybe a few months ago. She had $200 million. Again, she started as a San Francisco council member, worked her way up to the Senate, but she's never had a private sector job, but still worth $200 million, right? So wealth tends to accumulate with the old people that have been playing the political game of Cantillon winning, right? Like getting sort of handouts of some kind or rent seeking in some way and collecting lots of money. And those are the people that have the money, so they're the ones that everyone caters to. So if you want to make a lot of money, one thing you can do is be a home health helper or something like that, because a lot of these very old people don't want to go into a retirement home, but want to live at home, but they need some help. So a lot of people that's like a whole industry. In previous generations, they probably couldn't afford it, right? They didn't have all the Medicare and Social Security and all this stuff that's just that they've been able to take advantage of. When you sort of orient society around the rich people, society will generally orient itself around rich people, and they're really old. Well, okay, what about the young couples that want to have babies? Well, if it's society itself isn't oriented towards them, they're not going to want to have babies because they're not going to think that they can afford it and so on. And this is especially the case in a lot of East Asian countries where a lot of the older people, the average age in a lot of those places 48, 49, 50 even. It's so old that, okay, well, if you're sort of designing society around the current people that have money, well, then you're not going to have babies because it's not around, you're not designing society at all around the people that are actually able to have babies. Because of their reverence of older people and so on, it's been this fusion of really bad incentives so that not only do the old people have all the money, in the case of East Asian countries, it's usually real estate or something like that. So nobody young can afford it. There's no transition of that money sort of going to the next generation and so on, which naturally hampers under sound money because you can't just keep borrowing money and leveraging your way to, more and more wealth like a lot of these people do. So, all that's to say that that fertility goes down in a lot of these societies just because people the people that have the money are not having babies. They're much older usually, and the people that are younger, well, they can't afford it, right? It's not no matter what nominal things you do, right? A lot of these East Asian countries, for example, will give you all kinds of credit, government tax credits and stuff like that. It reminds me of a dying church, and I don't know if you've been to any of those, but a lot of them have been around a while, and you get sort of a graying of the congregation where it's just only old people that attend there. And they're like, well, how do we get young blood in here, right? How do we get new people? And they'll go, well, they probably want childcare. So they'll hire a childcare worker despite nobody in the congregation having babies. And they think, okay, if we just hire the childcare worker, then, they'll want to come. It's no, they're not. The young couples want to go where other young couples are, right? And like what you're doing is just kind of like putting a band-aid on a systemic problem. You've been growing old and you haven't invested in the young in the past. So of course, like it's almost too late at that point. And fiat money has put a lot of these countries in that similar position where they've invested so much in the old people, and like the boomer generation essentially is the old people right now. That the younger generations just don't have the wealth or the inclination to have babies at this point.
Yeah, you touched a bit on the Frankfurt School conundrum in the book, and I like. I'll quote: "Even procreation is viewed negatively by Marxists, whether due to environmental concerns or the strain on communal resources. There's empathy for existing lives, little enthusiasm for welcoming new ones."
Yeah, the entire Frankfurt School thing is like that. That was a fun deep dive to do in that part of the book about like how they emerged and how Marxism and Freud they essentially attacked the family and have been for a long time. So any socialist that tells you that they're pro-family, don't believe them because it's not in their doctrine. It never has been. I mean, BLM I think emerged from critical race theory. And you look up the tenets of critical race theory, it's just like the critical theory of the Frankfurt School, from which it was derived. They're very much anti-family. They're very much, the state should control all of this stuff. And that was part of the Marxist paradigm was that, okay, you need to loosen the bonds of family so that they're loyal to the state because the state is the most important thing. And actually, Rome. If you study Rome and the fall of Rome, this was a part of it. Was that they put so much emphasis on the country, the empire, that people started like not having loyalty to their families, right? Like a lot of these rich patricians would have like 3 or 4 mistresses and not have babies with any of them. They weren't interested. It was more about power and enjoying themselves and sort of being decadent and so on. But along with being loyal to the state. But that's what Marxism kind of requires. That's what critical theory requires. This is the entire woke left is, whether they know it or not, is significantly influenced by the Frankfurt School. In fact, like the word woke, I explain in the book, comes from this Marxist idea that you need the proletariat class to gain class consciousness of where they actually are. And the Frankfurt School basically said, well, it doesn't happen automatically. You have to be indoctrinated into being class conscious. And that's where they said, that's where the word woke came from, is being awakened into class consciousness about your standing in society and so on. Of course, that's all kind of BS because Marxism is complete BS. But that's where the word comes from. It persists to this day, and that's a part of their the way that they think or the sort of philosophy that they have. And unfortunately, like this would never survive in like a free market. But because we have fiat money, and you have like corrupt agencies that are funding all kinds of stuff, you get parasitical ideologies like this that get way more play than they would otherwise, through the distribution of money towards these places. I guarantee you, like a significant amount of like the USAID funding, which was just defunded, went towards a lot of people that had this ideology, and we saw it like with what was being funded, like DEI drag show in Lebanon or something, right? Like some random crap like that, or transgender mice, experiments. Like they're all like straight up coded as left-leaning things, and it was pretty obvious what was going on. That it was funding all of the sort of bankrupt ideologies that would never survive in a free market.
Yeah, that's interesting. And sort of maybe in the light of all your accomplishments, the books you've written, your contributions to Bitcoin, what is the significance of children?
That's it. I mean, I would say that nothing compares to my children, right? Like, because they are worth more than anything that I've done, everything combined that I've done. And I think that's true of pretty much any father, right? Like you talk to them about like what they've done, what's worth more to you, your career or your children? That's like every time, like my children, of course, any one of the children. And that's an unfortunate sort of debasement that we've debased kids so much, because every other culture, and this is part of the answer for the fertility question as well, is that so many people, debase children and think that they're not worth anything or without value or whatever. But like just ask any old person, right? Like anyone above 70 or 80, and you can ask them, hey, like what did you do? What were you? Whatever, and they can be like, oh, politician. I was a medical doctor. I was a professor. I was a sports star. Whatever. Okay, what do you think about, how do you look back on, and almost all of them will tell you, like, the things that I think about are my health and my children. That's it, right? Like, it doesn't matter what you've done in the past. Like, none of that stuff does, and it becomes crystal clear when you're older. It's just that we've been gaslit to believe that our careers or things need to wait or whatever. But really, like children are way more more worthwhile to almost anybody than anything that you can accomplish. And it's sad, but this was wisdom that every other culture before modern times had. Right. I mean, even to some degree today, if you go into like an Amish community, like the way you raise yourself in status is by having a child, right? Like that's like you're doted upon. Everyone is very happy about it. That used to be every community because you're growing the community, right? There's a communal sense of, okay, we're now getting bigger and so on. Instead, it's been replaced with like a company getting bigger or something, right? Oh, we're a startup. We have like 150 employees. It's like a very debased form of that sort of instinct sort of coming into play. But I mean, children, I think, are the thing that we should concentrate a lot more on. And unfortunately, fiat has debased children.
I mean, I agree wholeheartedly that they've debased family and children. Ourselves, our work lives, but I also agree that children are the most important thing and the best thing I've ever done. I want to quote you. I didn't mean to.
No, go ahead.
I want to quote you from your work. Women are often criticized for prioritizing their families over their careers. The act of raising children has been so devalued in the fiat economy that creating new life is considered less important than a meaningless rent-seeking desk job. Historically, motherhood was celebrated as a crowning achievement of a woman's life because in most cultures, people realized are the foundation of any civilization. I have told my wife that no matter what I do or achieve or invent, nothing can compare to the children she brought into the world. And it's true. Nothing comes close to the wonder of creating a person. This sentiment was shared by every culture and civilization until recently. What is like postmodern investing?
It's a fun one. So it used to be that investing was based on numbers, right? It was a pure numbers game. Okay, well, if I buy this bond, then how much will it pay me over time? And at maturity, how much will I have gained? And how safe is it? There's risk and so on. And stocks used to be valued the same way. Okay, if I buy this stock, how much of a dividend does it pay out? And by this time, how much will I have made, and so on. And that's how things used to be valued. It's no longer valued that way. Why? Because, well, companies don't pay out dividends anymore. And bond prices are more important than the actual coupon that they pay. So what's happened is that a lot of fiat money entered the picture. And when you add fiat money to the picture, the fiat money needs some place to go, and one of the biggest places that it goes are equities, right? Like into stocks and so on. So it used to be that dividends were a huge part. So I point out in the book that Standard Oil paid out a 33% dividend one year. Man, wouldn't it have been great to own that stock for that year? Right? Like, you have $100 stock, you got paid $33 just for owning the stock, not anything else. Just owning the stock got you $33. And this was earnings sort of paid out to the shareholders and so on. This is actually, by the way, how Rockefeller got so rich. He like after they broke up Standard Oil, he had like so many different oil companies, and they all paid out dividends. He kept all of them. So this is how equities used to be valued, based on dividend, based on how much money it's generating. Now it's not the case. In fact, a company like Amazon, which has been in existence since 1995, so 30 years of history, right? In the public markets, not even like private, public markets, they have not paid out a single dividend in all 30 years. And in fact, I think Microsoft has paid maybe one, right? Like so you can't make this calculation because the amount of dividend it's generating for Amazon stock is zero. So why are people buying it? Well, because it's a profitable company and it keeps growing, and there's expectation that it will keep growing. So the reason why people buy a stock like Amazon is because they expect the stock price of Amazon to grow instead of because of the dividend. So for a while it was only dividend. Then it was, okay, how much is the stock going to grow plus the dividend, and like sort of balancing that. Now it's just pure price appreciation. And this is where it gets really crazy, because for a while it was just, okay, well, these are profitable. So there's some connection to reality based on, okay, this stock is, Amazon at least is growing, like 1 out of 158 workers in the US work for Amazon, something like that. And, they have all kinds of products. But it started decoupling from even that, because at a certain point you realize, okay, well, it's not about the stock, it's the perception of the stock, right? So you had all these, cases of fraud, for example. Enron was a famous one where they, just sort of kept pumping the stock and so on. But at a certain point, it doesn't have to have any connection with reality whatsoever. And there's this weird phenomenon with like bankrupt stocks that I studied, where after a company declares bankruptcy, it goes onto the pink sheet. And instead of going to zero, it'll stay floating at around like $1 or something, which is really weird. And I discovered this, oddly enough, in 2008. And this was, if you remember, Chrysler and GM were both going bankrupt. And I actually had bought a bond that was supposed to pay out on the day that they declared bankruptcy because they couldn't pay that bond. And I had bought it like 6 months ago, thinking, they'll be able to pay this. And it was like trading at like a 90% discount. I just took a flyer or whatever. But they declared bankruptcy. So I looked at what happened, and the GM stock went into the pink sheets as like GMLQQ or something like that. And I expected it to go to zero. It did not. It hit a low of 25 cents, and it floated around $1, actually rallied to like $1.50. Now, you would think that would mean, okay, well, maybe there's some value going down to the shareholder somehow. Maybe they have so many assets that not the case at all. In fact, they had way too many suppliers to pay and so on. And the bankruptcy court there was no chance that the bankruptcy court was going to give anything to any of these shareholders. So what was going on? Well, it was the phenomenon of postmodern investing, right? Like where these people can just sort of rally it. Everybody that was going to dump the stock had already dumped. So they could just sort of keep it afloat and like play this game. Now, at the time, this was like completely shocking to me. Nowadays, this is like, oh, of course, like that happens all the time in meme coins, right? Like it's not about utility at all. It's all about a pump and dump marketing tactic. But that's what postmodern investing is that it's not just Dogecoin and dog with hat and like Trump coin or whatever. It's pretty much every equity. This phenomenon did not come out of nowhere. It's been percolating in the fiat economy for a long time. And it's this sort of like plaything where, enough investors get together and play this thing. And, we've had like the Wall Street bets crowd with, GameStop and Hertz and like many other companies that they've done this with. That's the phenomenon, is where the money drives the price instead of like any fundamentals, right? Like it's a very sort of like dark and nihilistic world that we live in, where this sort of phenomenon exists, but it's there, and unfortunately, it's only grown with the Scambrian explosion of meme coins. Although that seems to have turned the corner. I think the number of pump and dump meme coins on Solana has diminished significantly ever since what happened with Javier Milei.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. You note in the book that the most valuable companies in the world, like Tesla, Amazon, Apple, Google, and Facebook, all happen to be household names. It's not an accident. They're just, I guess, competing to be stores of value, which is weird. And Joe Burnett does a great report. He's been on the show, Your Wealth is Melting. I mean, these vehicles are not built for the world to dump their value into them. I mean, they're basically just giant pinatas. Because, I mean, if like NVIDIA was worth $10 trillion, another chip maker would come along to eat some of their lunch. And, the metrics would just, postmodern investing can only go so long, I think. What do you think about startups, though? Are they a legit non-fiat way to be an entrepreneur? And what is a Keynesian beauty contest?
Okay, yeah. So startups, I don't think are very good places to really start a business, right? Like the traditional VC funded startup, like the way the whole game works, and believe me, I'm a startup veteran. I've done this many times. Is that you get funding from a VC and they want you to grow as fast as possible. And the reason why they want you to grow as fast as possible is because they want you to hit sort of like that magical $1 billion unicorn mark. And the reason why they want you to do that is because at that point, it's a lot easier to get money in and so on. And you have all of these sort of inbuilt advantages of large companies. So that's their goal. And, you don't matter until you get to that stage. But the idea is to pump as much money into you and see if you can sort of survive your way into the unicorn territory. Doesn't matter if you're losing tons of money, as long as you get there, get to that sort of like magical $1 billion valuation. So it's really kind of a fiat game, right? Because what they're trying to do is create like, it's postmodern in that sense too. They're trying to will into reality something that's very valuable, and of course it's not, right? Like a lot of the companies that have come through this route over the last 15 years or so, like they've done nothing, right? Like the stories that all these VCs tell of companies like Google or Facebook or whatever, a lot of that happened before 2010, the NVIDIA, Apple, Tesla, even to some degree, Amazon, like the top is pretty full, right? Like you were saying, the household names that people have to like sort of pump in that stuff. So they're trying to wish into reality sort of like a new thing, because honestly, VCs haven't done all that well over the last 15 years, because there hasn't been that super success. I mean, you can argue about Uber or whatever, but they still don't make money, and they're just still kind of Airbnb, all these other companies that are supposedly huge or whatever. They're not really great businesses. So the entire startup culture is based around sort of like this fiat lie that you can sort of fake your way to $1 billion valuation. And I don't think that works. And it's got a very little chance of working. And I think it's time badly spent, and it's unfortunate, but Even the entire VC phenomenon is really like an extension of banking. If you think about it, they're a banker in many ways, right? Because they decide which ones to fund, but instead of giving you a loan, they take a significant amount of equity and pump it using their marketing skills or whatever. So it's not very good. The Keynesian beauty contest that you mentioned, that's a large part of the postmodern investing. It's not about fundamentals at all. It's a beauty contest with like blind judges or something like that, or like judges that willfully ignore, the actual beauty of the people. It's actually kind of like beauty contests now. I think they're like transgender people and like plus size models that get into these things or whatever. So anyway, it ends up being very very subjective. And if it's at a subjective point, then what you can do is rally a few people and make an alliance with them and sort of pump whatever you want to pump. And this is exactly how the meme coin industrial complex has operated. It's more of a Keynesian beauty contest than anything else. And frankly, all of the altcoin industry, right? It's a Keynesian beauty contest of lots of lies. And part of why Ethereum's gone down so much is because, a lot of the people in that community are completely jaded by what they've been told. They realize now, it was all lies. This thing was supposed to turn into a beautiful swan. It turns out to be like an ugly monster that doesn't do anything. So, that's where we are, unfortunately, with a lot of the investing and a lot of the altcoins and startups and the entire fiat system's corrupt.
Yeah. That's why we entered the Bitcoin matrix. But I do wonder, do you think that do you think Bitcoiners are rent seeking by hodling and maybe the speculative asset of it? Maybe you could argue some people, you put a small amount of your money in its savings, a little bit more it's investing. Maybe you put all your money in it's speculating, or maybe it's an emotional spectrum there. But do you think it's rent seeking? Or maybe do you think we'll be seen as rent seekers?
Yeah, I think that's what a lot of people see us as, especially in the traditional economy. Well, you held it from whatever, and but I don't think they really see how difficult it's been to hold Bitcoin. This isn't like Nvidia, right? Like where I mean, it's going up, and there's obvious like signs of everything, and AI is blowing up. So it's nothing like that. It wasn't very hard to hold Nvidia if you had some. But for Bitcoiners, I mean, we've been attacked since day one, pretty much, right? Even Satoshi was like, please don't use us, WikiLeaks, or we can't handle it as a community or whatever. We've been attacked from the very beginning, and that act of holding is the monetization of better money. Now, like, people may see us as rent seekers. I don't think we are. I think we're actually saving, and this is a much better savings vehicle, and than all of the other stuff like stocks or real estate or whatever. It's keeping up with the monetary debasement, basically. And it's ushering in a new monetary order. That said, I mean, I can see some of that argument of the people that are leveraging and speculating and stuff like that. But if they're doing that, then or going into debt to buy it or whatever, I think at that point it crosses the line into sort of speculation and trying to get something for nothing, which is at heart what rent seeking is.
Yeah, it's amazing. There's nuance to everything. Having written this book, do you think you want to see governments, or even more specifically America or your government, buy Bitcoin, like in a strategic Bitcoin reserve or digital asset stockpile?
Well, I do, and that's because I care about my neighbors. I care about my country. I'd like to see it like transition to a Bitcoin standard more smoothly, and having a Bitcoin stockpile will definitely help with that. If it doesn't have it, then I think you get horrible repression and all kinds of drastic, weird things going on, including hyperinflation and so on. At least with a Bitcoin reserve, there's a possibility of a smoother transition, maybe going onto a Bitcoin standard and so on. 'Cause if you study hyperinflating economies, the thing that takes over is a harder currency, and if the government has it, then it's a lot more likely that we transition into something like that. So I'd like to see it, and I think it would be good for it. I'm not exactly happy that you have to deficit spend to get it, but hey, if it's a balanced budget, then at least you're not like stealing through inflation to do it. You're still taxing people, but that's the reality everywhere anyways. And if you want to see the transition be less violent and a little more peaceful and rational, then I think it's reasonable to support this in that hope.
Well, how do you think Bitcoin makes relationships great again?
Well, I think first of all, you cut down all these like giant companies, and we have some hope of seeing some of that even in government with stuff like Doge, and even when Elon went into Twitter and cut like 80% of the people, that was, I think, the beginning of something. It's this idea that you don't. A lot of these positions are rent seeking in giant companies, and that's I would say endemic to large companies. If you get past a certain size, it's impossible to know what everyone is doing. So it's very easy for rent seekers to hide out and, okay, what happened to that money? Or like no one's really asking that question because there's just too many people and so on. So under sound money, though, you don't have these advantages that big companies have. So I think small companies start making a lot more sense. Maybe family businesses, right? Which used to be the norm, where you had a lot more family businesses. Community, locale based businesses. You'd have some manufacturing and so on, but it'd be a lot more tight knit because you're buying from people that are closer to you, that know your needs and are sort of competing to get you those. And price isn't the only thing that matters anymore. It's about like there's an expectation of quality and so on, and that quality generally doesn't scale very well, right? Like a really high quality something or other, it's not going to scale that much. So I expect that, and as a result, if you know your butcher, right, instead of just going to the supermarket, if you're going to a store where they make clothes from custom bespoke tailor or something like that, like you're gonna get to know them. So there's the relationship isn't so corporate, because almost all the commerce that we do is with a faceless corporation instead of people. But I think if you have them with people, it's a lot more satisfying. Like if you have like a relationship with somebody that provides something for you, well, you get closer to them, and maybe you start hanging out socially, and you start doing stuff for each other, and become friends or whatever. And I think that's a deep human need anyways, and people try to fulfill it by having clubs outside of work and so on. But commerce is actually a pretty good way to get involved in a lot of that. And this, you can make a lot more connections instead of these. If you think of like companies as like giant nodes on a Lightning network, instead of giant nodes, you have smaller nodes, and you're connected to more of them. It becomes a better network, more decentralized network, network of people that's more meaningful with better connections and so on, instead of these faceless entities that don't treat you like that don't care about you, right? That just sort of extract money from you.
Yeah. was one of the biggest things I got out of your book is how just fiat makes relationships about value extraction
Yeah.
shorter, less deeper, less meaningful. That was really insightful. My final question for you, because this has been so dope, is you always end on fiat delenda est. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but
Yeah.
what does that mean to you, and why do you always end on that?
Yeah, so that phrase comes from Carthago delenda est, which is what Cato the Elder used to say at the end of every Roman Senate session where he would give a speech. He could be talking about like the bread program or like appointment of a consul or whatever, and he'd just be like, Carthago delenda est, and that meant Carthage must be destroyed. Now, what was he talking about? Well, Carthage was the rival to Rome, and Carthage was in North Africa. It's a city in North Africa, but they had actually a pretty big presence around the Mediterranean, and Rome, of course, is right near the Mediterranean. So they were competing empires, and this was what Cato foresaw, was that they would come to a clash, and that if they wanted to survive, they needed to destroy Carthage, right? And that's what Carthago delenda est means. Carthage must be destroyed. And he ended it with that every single time. They ended up fighting 3 epic wars against each other, the Punic Wars, as they were called. And you might have heard of Hannibal, who was a Carthaginian general who came through the Swiss Alps from the north, which the Romans did not expect, with war elephants from Africa, and like absolutely scared the crap out of every Roman soldier seeing elephants for the first time. Fortunately, Rome won, and they were able to do like hit and run tactics and frustrate Hannibal, but they won the Punic Wars and like completely destroyed Carthage as Cato desired them to. So why do I say fiat delenda est? It's become sort of like a thing over the years. After Cato had said this and it became fulfilled, for commentators of various types to say X must be destroyed because X is our greatest enemy, or whatever X might be. So somebody on the left might say Trump delenda est, right? Like Trump must be destroyed or something like that. And somebody on the right might say like social justice warriors must be delenda est or something like that. So for me, the big enemy is fiat money. And I think it destroys itself in many ways, but it must be destroyed because it is such a pernicious thing that causes all sorts of wrong incentives, all sorts of moral hazards, all sorts of evil, essentially, all over the world.
Getting to speak with you, Jimmy, is always delightful. As always, the book is tremendous. I recommend people go out and get it. Fiat Ruins Everything, How Our Financial System is Rigged and How Bitcoin Fixes It. I'll leave it to you for any parting words and let people know where they can find you and your work.
Yeah, so the book is available on Amazon. I have a hardcover edition now that's available with the same artwork. And that I loved how it turned out, and it looks really nice. So if you're a collector or something, or if you like hardbound books, try to get that. It's again available on Amazon. If you want the audio book, it's currently available on Google Play. I had it generated with AI, so Audible will not accept it. But I loved how it turned out because the voice is so soothing and it pronounces everything properly and doesn't make mistakes. So I really, really like it much better than the previous audio that I had. But that's where you can find it. At some point, I will be opening up a Nostr store of some kind where you can buy all this stuff, and I can just sort of deliver it to you, like, and so on. All right, so that's where you can find my stuff. You can follow me on X at Jimmy Song, and you could go to my website programmingbitcoin.com. I have a 2-day seminar coming up at the end of the month. It'll be the final time I teach programming Bitcoin. And it's here in Austin. So if you're interested in that, if you're a programmer and want to learn from me, you can go apply at programmingbitcoin.com. Final parting words are that, like I don't know how optimistic I would be about the world if it weren't for Bitcoin. And we're sort of living in a time that's very hopeful. Not because things are so good, but I think we can finally see like a way out. I know a lot of people were deeply depressed around COVID and so on. But we're seeing the way out of all of this mess, and quite frankly, a lot of it was caused by fiat money. The entire medical industrial complex, the WHO, all that. I didn't write a chapter on that, but that is a natural result of fiat money, because it's an easy way to control the population through health scares and so on. But we finally kind of have a path, and we have hope again, and that's a beautiful thing, and we should not discount it.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Bitcoin Matrix. If you enjoyed the conversation, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment below with any questions or thoughts you may have. We'd love to hear from you. You can support the show by checking out our sponsors and affiliate links in the description. It helps keep bringing you great content while connecting you with awesome products that I believe in. Share this episodes with your friends, family, or anyone curious about Bitcoin. And let's keep growing this community together. Stay curious, keep stacking, and I'll catch you in the next one.